Hello, welcome to the Storytime English channel. The Last Leaf ode Henry's classic short story. The Last Leaf is a poignant narrative that powerfully illustrates the strength of the human spirit and the supreme sacrifice of love against a backdrop of the struggling artist. Community in Greenwich Village. The story centers on Johnsy, a young painter who has contracted severe pneumonia and has mentally resigned herself to death. She believes that her life will end the moment the last leaf drops from the old ivy vine. Outside her window, as her hope fades, Behrman, an aging and unsuccessful artist who lives downstairs, steps in. He determines to create the very masterpiece he has always dreamed of an act. That becomes the desperate key to saving Johnsy's life. By reading this tale, you will witness how the warmth of human compassion and a single selfless act of art can triumph over despair and the cold indifference of nature. It is a timeless story about hope, sacrifice, and the true meaning of artistic greatness. The Last Leaf, Chapter 1. The Sickness of Autumn Winding. Narrow streets of Greenwich Village, known for their bohemian charm and struggling artistic inhabitants, housed countless dreams in cramped attic studios. In one such top-floor apartment, facing the cold, northern light that artists crave, lived two young women from Maine, Sue and Johnsy. They were bound by their shared passion for painting and their optimistic, though sometimes naive, visions of future success. However, the late autumn of that year introduced a grim and formidable adversary to the village. Mr. Pneumonia. The invisible epidemic stalked the chill-ridden avenues and claimed its victims ruthlessly, particularly among the ill-nourished and often emotionally fragile artists. Johnsy was caught in the epidemic's grip. Her slight frame and inherently delicate spirit succumbed quickly to the fever and the chilling cough. Sue tended to her with unwavering dedication, preparing meager broths and constantly adjusting the thick blankets. Yet, Johnsy's condition failed to improve. She lay inert, refusing food, her gaze fixed with a disturbing monotony upon the small, square window facing the back wall of the adjacent building. On the fourth day of Johnsy's illness, the elderly local physician arrived. After a meticulous examination, he pulled Sue into a quiet corner of the room, his face reflecting grave concern. The doctor's voice was low but serious. "Sue," he began, removing his spectacles and rubbing the bridge of his nose, "I must be entirely honest. The problem here is not primarily pulmonary. I have done all the physical testing. Johnsy's body is fighting, but her will to live has completely deserted her." Sue stared at him, her eyes wide with fear and distress. "She has mentally convinced herself that she is on a one-way trip," he continued. "If a patient resigns themselves to dying, all my medical treatments become largely futile. My drugs can only offer about 5% of the cure when the mind has determined. The remaining 95% is unnecessary. You must, somehow, break this hold of despair she has allowed to take root." The doctor sighed heavily. "You need to reignite her interest in life, in anything fashion, art commissions, money, whatever. Distract her from this morbid preoccupation and give her a reason, however small, to hold on." He emphasized the point one last time. Her spirit must fight before the medicine can take effect. Following his departure, Sue sank onto a stool beside Johnsie's bed, hiding her canvas and brushes. She wept silently, feeling the overwhelming weight of responsibility. Johnsy lay motionless, her eyes closed, her pallor making her look fragile and distant. She seemed utterly resigned to her fate, inhabiting a solitary world of her own making. Then, a whisper broke the silence. 12. Sue lifted her head quickly. What is 12, Johnsy? What did you say? Johnsy's eyes flickered open, but her gaze was distant, fixed beyond the foot of the bed toward the window. Her voice was weak, yet startlingly calm. The leaves, the ivy vine. I've been watching them fall. There were nearly 100 when I first got sick. Look, there goes another one. Now there are 11. Sue quickly glanced out the window. Across the narrow yard, a massive, ancient ivy vine climbed the bare brick wall. The harsh breath of autumn had been relentless, and only a few skeletal branches still held on to their remaining, defeated foliage. What in the world does a rotten old ivy vine have to do with you getting better? You foolish girl? Sue demanded, trying to instill some forceful logic into her friend's mind. Johnsy managed a faint, chilling smile. When the last leaf drops, I must go to. Sue, I've known it for days. The vine is dying, and so am I. It's the natural order of things. Sue was horrified by the utter fantasy of it all. Nonsense. That is a purely imaginative idea, Johnsy. What connection could there be between your precious life and a few decaying leaves? It's simply absurd. Now, try to take a little of this broth. You need strength. But Johnsy refused, turning her head away. I don't want broth. Just let me watch. There are only 8 now. I want to see the last one fall before night comes. Then I won't have to wait anymore, and I can finally rest. Johnsy's voice carried a profound sense of exhaustion and readiness for oblivion. Sue's fear intensified. She knew that the physical ailment of pneumonia was now secondary to the mental illness of despair. She tried to distract her friend, recounting their future plans, talking about the exhibitions they would enter and the famous artists they would one day meet. But Johnsy simply closed her eyes, utterly unresponsive, her focus remaining intensely on the countdown she had initiated. As the afternoon light faded into a somber gray, Johnsy spoke again, her voice barely audible. Sue, you look. Tell me how many are left. I don't want to turn my head to look anymore. With a heart heavy with dread, Sue forced herself to look out. The wind had become noticeably stronger, and the leaves looked even more tenuous. She counted quickly. There were now only 5 leaves remaining, scattered across the desolate masonry. Johnsy, there are only 5 left, Sue reported, trying to sound calm and confident. But they look tough. They'll probably hang on until tomorrow. You mustn't let this ridiculous superstition worry you. Johnsy weakly shook her head. My strength is leaving me, Sue, just like the vines. When the morning comes, that last leaf will be gone. I only wait for it to drop. Then I can finally be free. Johnsy's utter surrender was a sight Sue could barely bear. She realized she needed more than just kind words. She needed an intervention. She decided to seek help from their neighbor downstairs, the crusty old painter, Behrman. He often posed for her sketches for a small fee, and though he was notoriously ill-tempered, he possessed a deep, albeit hidden, kindness. "I need to leave for a moment, Johnsy. Just for half an hour. I must finish a sketch for the magazine. Try to sleep, and please, don't look at the window again until I return." Sue tucked the blankets firmly around her friend and, with a sense of desperate urgency, hurried out of the room, her feet heavy as she descended the creaking stairs toward Behrman's studio. Chapter 2. Behrman's Dream, and Farizu rushed down the steep, rickety staircase and into the cellar-like studio of old Behrman. The room was perpetually dim, residing partly below street level, a chaotic mix of oil paint fumes, stale tobacco smoke, and the inherent dampness of the old building. This dingy space served as both the living quarters and the creative sanctuary for Behrman. Behrman, a massive man in his 60s, with a shaggy beard and fiercely scowling demeanor, was an artistic failure by the world's standards. For 40 years, he had talked grandly of painting his masterpiece, a work that would astound the art world and grant him immortality. Yet, his canvas, large and conspicuously blank, still stood untouched on an easel in the corner, a mocking monument to his unfulfilled ambition. He was known for his quick temper and his habit of railing against the injustices of the world and the foolishness of young artists. He considered himself a fierce watchdog, protecting the girls upstairs from the harsh realities of their trade. Sue found Behrman posing for a magazine illustration, a disgruntled hermit figure she needed to finish her paid commission. "Behrman, I need your help immediately. Please, I know you are busy, but it's about Johnsy," Sue pleaded. Her voice choked with barely suppressed tears. The old man turned, his sharp, dark eyes scrutinizing her face. "What is it now, Sue? I was just getting the proper gloom for the hermit. Are you crying? What has happened to the little one?" Sue knelt beside him and, pouring out her story in a rush of desperate words, explained Johnsy's illness and, more urgently, her fatalistic obsession with the falling ivy leaves. She recounted the doctor's prognosis that Johnsy had lost the will to live, and the current terrifying count of only 5 leaves remaining on the vine. Behrman listened, his face slowly transforming from irritation into an expression of thunderous, Germanic rage. He rose abruptly, slamming his large fist down onto the rickety table, causing the turpentine jars to rattle violently. Gott in Himmel. What a ridiculous idiocy! Behrman roared, his voice echoing through the narrow stairwell. Die because a few dried leaves fall off a rotten vine? Such a sickness of the mind is worse than pneumonia itself. Should she believe such foolishness? It is a travesty. It is a betrayal of the spirit of art. He cursed vehemently in German and then in broken English, pacing back and forth in the confined space of his studio. He accused Johnsy of being weak and ungrateful for life, his initial anger masking a deep, profound pity for the young, despairing artist. She must not be allowed to die because of such a dirty fantasy. He thundered, "This village is for fighters. This tragic end is not fit for a promising young girl like Johnsy. She is very weak, Behrman," Sue explained tearfully. "The fever has made her mind fragile. We need to do something, anything, to break this hold. Will you come up and perhaps talk some sense into her? She respects you." Behrman initially refused, his pride wounded by the thought of confronting such idiocy. "I will not talk to such a ninny," he growled. "But I will come. I am a sentimental old fool, and I cannot stand by while my children face ruin. I will come up and look at her." The old painter quickly donned his heaviest, moth-eaten coat and, grumbling loudly, lumbered up the stairs with Sue. They entered Johnsie's room on tiptoe. Johnsie was asleep, her face thin and pale against the pillow, giving her an ethereal, almost spectral appearance. Sue silently led Behrman to the window. The old man peered out. The final traces of daylight illuminated the dreary brick wall. The harsh, cold wind whipped the remaining branches. The 5 leaves clung tenuously, looking defeated and ready to surrender to the mounting power of the autumn night. Behrman stared fixedly at them for a long time. He turned away, his face now surprisingly quiet. All traces of bluster and fury were gone, replaced by a look of profound pity and a deep, intense gravity. He understood completely. Johnsie's belief, however irrational, was now absolute truth to her. The fall of those leaves would be the signal for her own death. Without a single word, they left the room. Downstairs, Behrman picked up Sue's drawing board. "Good. I will sit for the hermit now. I will earn my $1, and we will defeat this sickness." He sat down, his large, imposing figure now radiating a quiet intensity. As Sue sketched, the wind outside began to rise again, sounding like a mournful hound baying for souls. The rain started, soft at first, a chilling prelude to the approaching storm. Behrman sat motionless, his gaze fixed intensely on the direction of Johnsie's window, his own masterpiece forgotten, contemplating the battle that the night would bring, a battle fought not with paint, but with life and death, the fate of a young girl, and the power of a ridiculous leaf, now rested on the shoulders of the old, failed master. Chapter 3. The night's battle and the dreadful dawn's night descended with terrifying violence upon the streets of Greenwich Village. What had begun as a blustering wind escalated into a ferocious gale. The storm, a dark, primal force, seemed determined to strip the world bare. In the top-floor studio, Sue and Johnsie lay trembling under their blankets, listening to the brutal symphony outside their window. "Did you hear that, Sue?" Johnsie whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. "That was the chimney rattling. It is coming for everything tonight. Nothing can survive this. I know those leaves are gone. When the sun rises, my waiting will be over." Sue tried to offer calm words, but her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach. She could picture the ancient ivy vine being mercilessly battered against the brick wall. The sheer force of the wind and the driving rain made the survival of those 5 pitiful leaves an impossibility. Sue knew that Johnsie's life was now tethered to a doomed piece of foliage. Hour after hour, the siege continued. The rain hammered against the glass like shrapnel, and the wind shook the entire building on its foundations. Around midnight, a particularly vicious gust tore through the alley, followed by a sound that seemed to signal pure destruction. "They are all gone," Sue thought with sickening certainty. pulling her blanket over her head to muffle the despairing sound of the storm. Johnsy will see the bare wall, and that will be the end of her. Yet, Johnsy remained strangely silent, her quietness more alarming than any scream. She was listening, passively waiting for the moment of confirmation. Sue lay awake, praying with a desperate intensity she had never known. She focused on the rhythm of Johnsy's shallow breathing, checking constantly to ensure her friend was still alive, slowly, agonizingly. The storm began to subside. The wind's roar softened to a weary sigh, and the drumming rain faded into a soft drizzle just before the first hint of grey dawn appeared. The room was consumed by a heavy, breathless stillness, the silence after the battle. Sue, though profoundly exhausted, knew she could not sleep. The moment of reckoning was approaching. As the pale, colorless light of morning began to filter into the room, Johnsy spoke, her voice weak but carrying a sharp edge of command. "Sue, pull back the curtain now. I want to see. I must know what is left. I am tired of waiting." Sue's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands were clammy as she reached for the thick green curtain. She hesitated, wanting to invent an excuse, but the finality in Johnsy's voice demanded compliance. With a trembling hand, Sue quickly yanked the shade open. She gasped a sharp intake of breath that was a complex mix of disbelief, relief, and pure wonder, clinging steadfastly to the brick wall. Defying the fury of the storm was one single ivy leaf. It was the last one. The leaf was a dark, muddy green, its edges frayed and yellowed by the cold, but it held firm against the wall. It did not move or tremble. It looked like a painted sentinel, holding its ground with heroic tenacity against the bleak backdrop of the dawn. Johnsy stared at the leaf for a long, quiet moment, an expression Sue had never seen before. A strange mix of shame, awe, and remorse began to dawn on her face. "It is the last one," Johnsy whispered finally. "I thought it would surely fall during the night. I heard the wind and the rain. It has been kept there, deliberately. It means I have been a wicked girl." Tears began to well up in Johnsy's eyes, the first genuine, heartfelt emotion Sue had seen in days. To want to die because a silly leaf drops is a sin. That poor, brave little thing has shown me how bad I was. It has stayed there to prove to me that I must fight too. The powerful symbolism of the enduring leaf had broken the destructive spell of her despair. Johnsy's will to live, previously surrendered, surged back into her fragile body. She had witnessed a miracle of persistence, and it had shamed her into fighting. "Sue," Johnsy said, her voice stronger than before, wiping away her tears. "I want some broth now, and some milk with a little sugar. And please, bring me a hand mirror. I need to sit up and watch you draw. I have plans to make. Sue, I'm going to paint those beautiful warm lights of Italy when I get well." Sue burst into uncontrollable, joyful sobs. Her friend was back. The leaf, the absurd obsession, had become the unlikely catalyst for survival. The deadly countdown was over. Johnsy was no longer waiting for death. She was planning for life. But neither young artist yet knew the true meaning behind the tiny miracle clinging so stubbornly to the cold, unforgiving wall. Chapter 4. The masterpiece revealed transformation in Johnsy was immediate and profound. With the return of her will to live, her physical recovery began with astonishing speed. She sat up in bed, ate the broth with enthusiasm, and demanded that Sue read to her while she sketched small, tentative figures on a scrap of paper. The fever broke the following morning when the physician arrived for his usual visit. He emerged from Johnsey's room beaming. Full recovery is now certain, he declared to Sue. She is in no danger. Her turning point was purely psychological. She has regained her spirit, and the medicine is now working its magic. Give her nourishing food, keep her mind engaged, and she will soon be as good as new. He marveled at the resilience of the human spirit. Seemingly unaware of the small, solitary object clinging to the wall outside, Johnsey continued to draw strength from the leaf. She often gazed at it, feeling a deep, quiet gratitude for its stubborn refusal to fall. It was her constant, silent reminder of the courage she needed to emulate, to days after the storm. With Johnsey's condition stable and improving rapidly, Sue sat beside her friend, holding her hand gently. Her face was clouded with a sorrowful gravity that Johnsey immediately noticed. "Sue, why do you look so troubled?" Johnsey asked. "I'm almost well. What is it?" "Johnsey, darling," Sue began, her voice low and tight with emotion. "I have something difficult to tell you. This morning, the doctor brought some sad news about old Behrman." Johnsey looked up, surprised. "Behrman? What about the grumpy old man? Is he angry about his pay?" "Behrman was taken to the hospital 2 days ago," Sue said, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "He was suffering from acute pneumonia. He died this morning." Johnsey gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, poor Behrman. He was such a strong old man. How did he get so sick so quickly?" "That is what I must explain, Johnsey," Sue continued, struggling to maintain her composure. "The doctor said that when they found him in his room yesterday morning, he was in terrible pain, and his clothes were soaked through and icy cold. The police who were assisting found some strange things near his bed." Sue paused, her eyes searching Johnsey's. "They found a ladder placed outside his window, still slightly wet. Near the foot of the ladder, they found a lantern, which was still dimly burning, and on his studio table there was a small palette with smears of green and yellow paint that was still fresh." Johnsey listened intently, her brow furrowed in confusion. Green and yellow paint? A ladder? What was he doing outside in that terrible storm? "Sue." Sue gently pulled Johnsey's head towards the window, pointing across the yard. "Look closely at that last ivy leaf, Johnsey. Look at it in the afternoon light. Did you not wonder why it never moved when the wind was raging the other night? Did you not wonder why it has held on for 2 days without ever fluttering or falling, even when the real, dried-up leaves were long gone?" Johnsey's eyes widened as she focused on the leaf. She stared, noticing for the first time its unnatural rigidity, its perfect outline despite the battering wind, and the slightly crude rendering of its texture. A terrifying, heartbreaking realization began to sink into her mind. "Oh, Johnsey," Sue finished, her voice breaking into sobs. "It is Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there that night the last real leaf fell. He went out into the rain and the sleet and the wind, climbed that ladder, and painted the leaf onto the cold brick wall to save your life. It was the great work he always dreamed of doing, and he died doing it. Johnsy broke down, weeping uncontrollably as the immense scope of the old painter's sacrifice was fully revealed to her. She understood that the symbol of her salvation, the unyielding leaf, was, in fact, a selfless, tangible expression of profound human compassion. Behrman, the crusty old failure who had never achieved fame, had risked and lost his own life in the most brutal weather to create an illusion that possessed the power of absolute truth in the mind of the despairing. The last leaf was not just paint on a wall. It was the ultimate act of friendship, a sacrifice that transcended art itself. Johnsy now knew that she was fighting not only for herself, but for the memory of the brave old man, whose unfulfilled dream had culminated in the life-saving portrait of a single, enduring leaf. She vowed to live fully, honoring the supreme act of love that had redeemed her own lost will. Chapter 5. The masterpiece revealeth dramatic turning point wrought by the last leaf was instantaneous and permanent. With the renewed will to live, Johnsy's recovery accelerated at a miraculous pace. The heavy pallor lifted from her cheeks, her eyes regained their spark, and her appetite returned with vigor. She now ate the broth enthusiastically, and even demanded toast, chatting with Sue about the future, about the grand exhibition they would host, and, most importantly, about the need to travel to Italy to paint the luminous colors of the South. The doctor, during his afternoon rounds to days after the great storm, confirmed the absolute victory of spirit over ailment. "She is out of danger," he announced, beaming at Sue. "Her fever is down, and her determination is strong. My drugs can now do the work. The crisis has passed. She is safe." He paused before leaving. "Now, I must attend to another patient downstairs, an old man, a painter, I believe. Severe pneumonia. He is quite critical, as his illness developed very suddenly and harshly later that afternoon." With Johnsy resting peacefully and sketching happily, Sue sat beside her, her face reflecting a deep, melancholy sadness. The time had come to reveal the truth. "Johnsy, darling," Sue began, taking her friend's hand gently, her voice thick with emotion. "I have something very sad I must tell you. This morning, the doctor brought news from downstairs." Johnsy looked up, instantly sensing the gravity in Sue's tone. "Is it about the old painter he mentioned? Poor man, he was so grumpy." "It's about old Behrman," Sue confirmed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "He passed away in the hospital this morning. The pneumonia took him quickly." Johnsy gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "Behrman, but he was so strong. How could he get so sick in just 2 days?" "That is the part I need you to understand, Johnsy," Sue continued, squeezing her friend's hand tighter. "The doctor said his illness was not gradual. It struck him hard and suddenly. And this morning, the janitor found Behrman in his room, helpless and cold. His clothes were drenched through and frozen stiff. They found his shoes and coat covered in mud and snow." Sue paused to steady her voice, which was trembling with the weight of the revelation. "And listen to what they found in his studio. Near his window, they found a ladder that was still wet and covered in dried mud. His small easel was outside, slightly damaged by the wind, and on his rickety stool they found a palette with blobs of bright green and yellow paint mixed together, along with a few of his paint brushes. Johnsy listened intently, her brow furrowing with deep confusion. But why? Why was he outside in that terrible, icy storm? What was he painting? Sue gently pulled Johnsy's attention towards the window, where the single, heroic ivy leaf still clung stubbornly to the desolate brick wall in the afternoon light. "Look at that last leaf, Johnsy. Just look at it closely. Didn't you wonder, even for a moment, why it never moved when the real leaves fell? Why it stood firm when the wind was raging like a beast? Why it is still there now, to hold days after the storm should have torn it to shreds?" Johnsy stared at the leaf. The afternoon sun highlighted its perfectly drawn outline, its dark color, and the fact that it seemed too perfect to still. No wind could make it flutter. Her blood ran cold as the terrible, beautiful truth dawned upon her. "Oh, no," Johnsy whispered, tears streaming down her face, tears of sorrow mixed with an overwhelming sense of guilt. It's not real, is it, Sue?" "It is not real, Johnsy," Sue confirmed, embracing her friend and allowing her own tears to fall freely. "It is Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there that terrible night. He knew that the last real leaf would fall, and he knew that when it fell, you would die. So he went out, in the freezing cold and the pouring rain, with his ladder and his lantern, and he painted that leaf on the wall." Sue pulled back, looking into Johnsy's stunned eyes. "He was chilled to the bone. He caught the pneumonia that killed him while he was protecting your hope. His heart was so warm, Johnsy, that he froze his body to save your soul. He always wanted to paint a great masterpiece. He failed in the eyes of the world, but he succeeded in the eyes of the heavens. That last leaf, painted on a cold, indifferent wall, is his most magnificent work. It gave you the courage you needed to live." Johnsy buried her face in the pillow, weeping for the gruff, failed old artist who had given up his life for her. The single, painted leaf was no longer a symbol of her weakness, but a powerful, enduring monument to a selfless love that she now carried in her heart. She understood that she was bound to live, not just for herself, but to honor the ultimate sacrifice made by the brave old man whose greatest work was painted. In the dark of night, in green and yellow oil, on a humble brick wall,